Om Durga Devi Gayatri Om Katyayanaya Vidmahe Kanya Kumari Dimohi Diyo Yona Prachodayat Durga Devi Namaha. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So welcome everyone to the first day of Navaratri. We have 9 days and 9 nights coming in the near future, in this next week or more, over through next weekend, where we will be celebrating. And in the West, quite a lot. It's celebration done by noting the different forms of the Divine Mother. Each day she changes, as it were. And in that way, we're able to keep our minds on the Shakti power, the dynamic Shakti power of Shiva. As Sri Ramakrishna said, Brahman and Shakti are one and the same, like fire in its heat and water in its wetness. So they have that inseparable yogic union at all times, going on through eternity. And then when they bifurcate, or apparently so, then we have all the inherent and hidden intelligence, living intelligence, as Swamiji called it, coming forth and manifested by the Shakti power herself. So it's a great concept if you want to just define it lightly, or more than that, it's a great axiom or principle that lovers of divine reality, as Lexicon used to call them, always gather around that great principle of Shiva and Shakti, or Brahman and Shakti. And it pretty much holds the same, or might change its accent a bit throughout the different darshanas of India. Even in yoga, we have slokas by Patanjali calling her Chit Shakti, or the power of intelligence, thought. And then, of course, Vedanta and in Tantra, they are accented, particularly in Tantra. So we're going to have 9 days and 9 nights of worship all over the world. And in SRV, we usually have our great once a year major puja. And the travel restrictions are keeping us from doing that, but we may have our own version of that here in Hawaii. And also good to tune in on India, on the Ramakrishna Orders Navaratri, if you want to call it up online. They have it going all day and all night, I think, or at least all day for those 9 days. And you can join in and listen to all the music and songs and celebrations and pujas as they decorate the image of the Divine Mother, build her up out of the elements of the earth, and cover her with vermilion paint, and then cloths of clothing and jewelry, and worship going on, and feeding her. And it's a very beautiful thing if you're in India to witness that day to day going on, as some of us have been. So, and then at the end, of course, she gets dissolved back into the sacred Ganga. So the whole thing, of course, indicative of the manifestation and dissolution of all things, all forms, all names, but also indicative of how we should be very reverential about that process. Those beings who are traditionally called reverent and peaceful, but those beings who aren't are missing out on that divine expression that's going on, and doesn't work its way into their life either. So beings have to be very careful about losing that sense of the sacred with both the divine and the secular, or nature, both spirit and nature. So it's a very good time to be meeting with you. And I chanted the Durga Gayatri when we came on just now. So we have propitiated her with mantra. Now we should do so also with words. I'm here throughout the days and weeks to commune with you all in different ways, and email and on our new website and various other ways. Put a new God blog on last night, real late at midnight before I retired. So you can look at that and read some of these little Brahman bites, I like to call them bites, BYTES, as we look on these virtual mechanisms and able to actually imbibe the Dharma there. So I'm here to commune with you, whether you have questions or whether you just want to converse and share, read the Dharma. And then we'll have this opportunity this weekend and throughout the following weekends to come, as long as these mechanisms are available, to share in the Dharma, discuss it, ask questions about the teachings, and in that way fulfill ourselves even more and participate in our own spiritual life and awakening, and share it with others too, as Holy Mother told us to do. She told us, now that you have found Sri Ramakrishna, then you have found what you've been looking for probably many lifetimes. And now once you just turn and share it with others on your way to the goal. So it's good to know that, to acknowledge that we are on our way to the goal, and also then to know that we're fulfilling her words when we share it with others and attract others into it. So let's open up the satsang then quickly for questions and discussions so that we can all commune that way together in the spirit of Atma Vichara, that is inquiry, Vichara, into the nature of reality, divine reality, we like to call it. It's a nice English word that can fall in place of the traditional words like Allah or Brahman or Almighty Father. So if anyone has some questions they've come with to a satsang with, which is a good idea, go ahead and be the first. Yes, Michaela.
Hello, I have a question about meditation practice because for many years I have found it natural to meditate in the evening. It requires no discipline. It's exactly what everything about me wants to do. But I hear you speak often about meditation in the morning and its importance. When I wake up, my mind is instantly filled with my responsibilities and duties, and I find it's not as natural to sit in the morning. So should I discipline myself to do this, or should I wait until it arises naturally in me to sit in the morning? What are your thoughts on that?
Sometimes it's good to wait and see how things manifest, but there's a kind of discrimination that one uses to find out the difference between that, the wisdom of waiting and the wisdom of forcing the issue a little bit. Maybe that's too harsh a phrase to use, but basically one has to kind of push the envelope. And I think that's one of the cases where that would be advisable, is that because you can notice the difference between a habit, and you can feel a habit even though you're caught in it. But in other times, you know that it's just not the right timing. It's kind of an intuition thing. So if you maybe beyond intuition even is this just discrimination, where you can spot a habit that needs to be changed or dissolved in you, and you're just being complacent or procrastinating about it. And I think in terms of spiritual practice, so that's one of the things that's extremely important, to be a little bit forward and forward moving about. So I would say that if the mind is restless in the morning, then that's the fault of a habit that you've fallen into, that the soul has fallen into. It should have come out of a peaceful place in sleep, and the peace should carry on into the waking state. So that's where you would bring forward the teaching in Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, about waking, dreaming, and deep sleep being the three phases of our one consciousness. Three levels, you might say. And we have three worlds to go with that. I just answered a question this morning from a professor about the three worlds, who was interested in that. Still thinking about the physical universe, that they're in the physical universe. And I said, no, that's not the idea. Three worlds. The first world is this whole physical universe with all its galaxies. That's one world. It's physical in nature, so you can easily categorize it as that. But anyway, I'm getting too far off into explaining the three worlds. But back to your question, it does connect to that, because you should, for instance, somebody asked me just the other day again about how to make one's dreams peaceful and blissful. And I said that you have to start with the waking state, because Gaudapada says the two states mirror each other, waking and dreaming. And the same things are in both of them. They're just at a different level of particle vibration, thought vibration. So you're going to want to render your dreaming state very peaceful and blissful by disciplining your mind in the waking state, and then it'll transfer nicely. You keep it up long enough, and pretty soon there are no 2 or 3 states anymore, as the Habituate sings. I don't know anything about waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. I didn't even know about a 4th state they talk about. So he's just erased a line of demarcation between these subdivisions, or these bifurcations or trifurcations that are happening to people out of habit. It's sort of a natural way that Maya operates in the realms of name and form. So to get more specific again, then to wake up and go to meditation right away is recreating everything, Nitya Sarga. You do it with utsaha, kind of enthusiasm. And the night before, you dissolved everything. You were Shiva, or you used Shiva power to dissolve everything. But in the morning, you're Lord Brahma again, and you're waking up and you're projecting it all. And how you project it is going to make your day. That's a nice phrase. Let's use that. It's going to make my day. So, and then during the day, you're Vishnu, and you're sustaining it all, and you know how masterful he is. And then at night, you dissolve it all back again into, like bubbles into water. Another of my God blogs from last week explains that nicely. And so get up on that new site and take recourse to it several times a day, but also take recourse to meditation on it several times a day, in the morning and at night. So for contemporary people, for Westerners and so forth, it's going to be a bit difficult to arrange their mornings, because the world has them going to work or going to school and kowtowing to all the things that have to play into their daily life. And so there is no time in a conventional life, and it's not even mentioned or any mentioned by conventional parents that you should get up. In my house, it was get up, it's time to go to school. I would have really liked to hear get up and meditate, because that's what you would be if you were at a monastery, you see, or if you had been living in the ashram of the Guru's house. The first thing you do would be to meditate. So you'd change that habit that you had, and then it would become very natural, and meditation would be like breathing to a drowning man. That's how my teacher used to say it. What air is to a drowning man, what the wind is to a bird's wings, that's meditation to the sincere aspirant. So that's both some Dharmic teachings about it and my advice personally. It should definitely be done, even if it's only a half hour of japa or whatever you can manage in your schedule. Anurag?
First of all, I want to thank Michaela for that question. And I encountered it this morning. I got up at about 4 o'clock and I was thinking, well, maybe I'll read a little bit. And then I remembered you saying, try to meditate as soon as you get up. So the veil between the dream and the awakened state is very thin. So it is a good time to meditate. And even though, and that resistance is worth breaking through from my own personal experience. Anyway, my 2 cents there regarding that subject. I've been thinking a lot about prana, and particularly I was thinking about the we're talking about sthiti pragyaya, or steady wisdom in the Gita, and the relationship between steady wisdom and steady prana. I mean, it's like one reinforces the other. It's like a virtuous cycle. And I was reading this morning in Footfalls, looking at the chart of prana and the illusion of death, and there's a quote from the Taittiriya Upanishad. Those who contemplate prana as Brahman attain the full span of life. The soul becomes fearless only when it obtains that secure ground. I never really encountered that notion of prana being Brahman. I mean, in the sense everything is Brahman, but prana belongs to Prakriti, and Brahman is off by itself. So I'm curious about that quote from the Upanishad, contemplating prana as Brahman.
Yes, I've of course mentioned that before, and mentioned the Prajna Upanishad and the Taittiriya Upanishad as being the two where prana is really mentioned and even put into that context as being one with Brahman. I think prana belongs more to Shakti than to Prakriti, but of course, even if prana, the lower prana belongs to Prakriti, then both of them belong to Shakti. So we again, in this divine mother time, make all efforts to return everything to the source, and the source of everything dynamic is of course in her. She's the dynamic power of Brahman, which is what Shakti means. And our founder Lex Hixon used to always speak in those terms too. So if you were not able to speak about something as transcendental and as cerebral and maybe as inconceivable as Brahman, then you probably fall back on the life force as being the next thing to look at, because mother is so hidden, or she is your very life force. And, more in a sense, since she's dynamic, she's more a part of you than Brahman is. So the next thing that the next go-to move, as it were, for the mind to grasp onto would be the prana. And people know about a little bit about the 5 pranas here on earth, but then the psychic prana is missing, and I think there's a kind of prana that runs between the gross prana and the psychic prana too, that has to do with the tanmatras and intermediary realms, subtler energy that connects you to the psychic prana, because all of this is, of course, about practice of yoga is about making connections, as far as I'm concerned. Things that are already there, probably an inferior and a little bit difficult position to take up, to say that I'm going to become aware of such things, or I have to create them anew. So it's better just to awaken to the presence of something. It's much easier and it's much more truthful to awaken to a presence that's already there, but that has maybe been covered over. And that's why Vedanta goes to the Vivarta principle, false superimposition, so that the mind will become aware of its own essence. And in yoga, that's of course becoming aware of the mind's powers. And some of those powers are, of course, yogic, and some of them are occult. So one has to be careful to distinguish between the two. But when that discrimination is made and that discernment is put into effect, then one can effectively get on that Garuda bird, if you want to put it anthropomorphically, and ride the prana in and out. And that's exactly what you'd be doing when you wake up and go to sleep, is getting on that energy and moving in and out with it, and you become masterful at it. It's funny, these recent rash of cartoon movies and everything about dragons, even that famous movie that was part animation about dragons, to me is just really an outer sign that people have some sort of intuitive knowing about training your dragon, that they're taking it all from the ancient times and the rishis and so forth. And the Garuda bird would be the dragon of all dragons in that sense. And one would mention actually in the Rig Vedas as Garutman, the great energy that takes one in and out of death, the realms of beyond death and into the realms of beyond the three worlds and so forth. Very much akin to Kundalini Shakti, as if the same thing is being talked about in two different ages. So yes, the prana is a very valuable tool, spiritually speaking, and it's something that we should have never lost track of or taken for granted, is what I like to say. As air, earth, fire, water, and ether are taken for granted, then certainly the prana that's animating them will also be taken for granted. But the opposite is also true. That if you become aware of the prana within you, like in dream state or in meditation, then you'll become more sensitive about the elements out of which that flow from the prana. So however way you do it, the Upanishads say that that's the second best way to do things, is to awaken to the prana. First best things to have your mind already in knowledge of these principles and utilize them like a master or like a past master.
Babaji?
Yes, Abhinaya.
Namaste. I have a cross question in regards to this. So if we know and recognize the prana, then we're also able to control the mind. So knowing the prana also helps us know our own mind. Then can it be examined from also outward to inward?
That's essentially what I just said, that the Upanishads state that there are two ways to do it. And the yoga system of yoga comes along and affirms that for us too. But if you're speaking just about Vedanta, which is Upanishad, then Upanishad wants you to, well, put it this way: if you go to a teacher and they see that you're sleeping, that is, basically you're wide awake but you're sleeping, is how the song puts it. In the whole mind walking around fully awake, yet you're dreaming. So if they see that you're still spiritually unawakened but you're physically awakened, then they know that your spiritual life is on hold or hasn't occurred to you yet. And that's a dangerous thing, because then over time worse habits than just restlessness will happen. You'll total forgetfulness will happen, and remembrance is, of course, half the battle towards enlightenment. So forgetfulness would be a great enemy in that case. So if you go to a teacher and they see that you're sleeping like that, spiritually sleeping, then the first thing they'll say, especially if you're like a Westerner or an American in these days that doesn't know anything about the Dharma, hasn't been raised in it, and doesn't have a culture that's been steeped in it for thousands of years, then they're going to tell you to breathe, and then maybe give you some philosophical teachings on what the breath means. And I always think here in Hawaii, when the white people showed up from England on these sailing ships, that they thought that we weren't breathing and we had turned white. So they called us howlies. So that word persists today. And so, anyone who has a deeper connection to nature than just trying to master it or dominate over it, as we just said, take it for granted, and then they're going to be more connected with nature and more living. They'll be breathing in the air and feeling life. They'll have a zest for life. And that means the prana, at least at the gross level, is moving through them. Whereas you cover yourself with too many clothes and perfumes and forget to breathe and so forth, you become a kind of Western society that has no connection with nature at all, but to speak with what nature is telling you, that everything exists, that prana should be flowing and moving like the ocean and like the winds. The great wind inside of you, the Mahamaya, which I was meditating on early this morning, is a great. I was trying to think of a God blog around that great principle, but it's called the Mahavayu, and the great wind that awakens in you between midnight and 4. It's blowing the most apparently. So the yogis like to meditate between midnight and 4 in the morning to catch the updraft of that Mahavayu, which is really referring more to Kundalini Shakti. So I know a lot of information there, but the thing is that would be the way in which you would take a sleeping person and awaken them, is through the prana. And if you, in the other scenario, if you were, say, from a culture that was raised in the Dharma, but you were still trying to expand yourself beyond just realization of the prana, and you went to a teacher, that teacher would see that you were awakened already, and they would then start you working on your mind. So a short answer to your question is yes, outer to inner is a way to do it, and unfortunately, in a sense, that's the way most beings in the Kali Yuga are going to have to approach yogic practice. But the better way, and I've said it before, is the way these seers come into the world already armed with flowing prana and already availed of higher wisdom. Those beings you see behind me on the fireplace mantle altar there, those are all beings that came into the world with their minds already awake and with their prana already flowing. They didn't have to do any practice, not practice of the basic kind, but you can't jump to that. And that's another problem. You might say a third way of these two that I'm mentioning that's not just inferior, it's actually incorrect, is that you try and pretend, or you jump to a higher step, and with all this fear of falling, without the prana awakened, without Kundalini Shakti propitiated. Like today is the first day of Durga Puja, so we should be saying the mantra that given to us by Sri Sharda and her children every day, many times. That should never leave our mind all day. And even when we're working, it can be in the background of our mind. Brahman will have to fall behind because it's actionless, but the mantra doesn't have to. It can stay pretty much in the front of everything as we work. So that's a very traditional Vedantic teaching, but it's funny how it's not said that often. I don't hear it said by other Dharma teachers much. Yes, they just say, do some hatha yoga and breathe. And but really, when they say get a hold of the prana, it's starting at a much higher level. In Vedanta, it's connecting the prana to the psychic prana. So they want your mind awakened. That means your thoughts have to flow. And the thoughts are going to have to be supported, as Anurag just said, by prana. The wisdom is supported by the prana, and the prana is supported by food. So by taking stock of the tradition and following the tradition, and then cutting out your own path, as we've talked about, you will be in good, steady footing and on good ground. At the same time, you'll be opening more and more to higher spiritual experience. Don't call me a master, Sri Ramakrishna said, because that assumes that everything is closed off to me now and I know everything. Everything is continually opening in Divine Mother. Hundreds and thousands of nadis, channels, want to open and conduct this light. And they want to go further and further, and pretty soon just dip themselves in the ocean of living intelligence. Light, light, leaping through the nerves. I remember Sri Aurobindo saying that in his day and writing that in his books. So that means spiritual light flowing through the nadis, and breathing starts it off at the physical level. If you're not doing it, being aware of the breath is the simplest teaching you can get after I'm not the body is understood. But yet you're breathing to make the body more animated, and then to get better food, to get better prana. So yes, moving from the outside in is necessary for beings who have forgotten a lot of their true nature, but it's also a natural process that people can do without having to feel like they're back at the first step anymore. There's that good book back in the 60s called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. It was to say that, that anytime you practice Zen, even if you're a master, you're still just a beginner. That's almost the same thing as saying, don't call me a master, isn't it? So you're always learning and opening anew each day. Each day you wake up, you wake up with enthusiasm. That's Lord Brahma, and then your Lord Vishnu kicks in, and you're running a perfect day. You're at the head of all the nadis, the flow of light. You're doing that yourself. It's all under your auspice. Then at night, you, with peace and anticipation, in a different direction, then you dissolve it all and let it all go, and rest in deep peace. That even at the end of an entire age, that's called nidra samadhi, or mahanidra. It's the great sleep. It's the great sleep in which even Shiva will enter into, and so after the dissolution is over, and then all comes back again full circle into the new cycle. So I've often said, drawn those correlations: the in breath, the held breath, the out breath, the waking, the dreaming, the deep sleep, the beginning of time, the middle of time, the end of time, so to speak. All of those are triple movements that just are the very same thing at different levels of our consciousness. So if you want to start with the physical and move your way inwards, then you become aware of your three breaths, your threefold breath, and you balance them. And you do this consciously with awareness, not just a habit, like, I think it's time to do a little pranayama, and I don't know what it means, where it comes from, where it's supposed to go. And that's the aspirant, the Hatha Yoga aspirant of today. And it's not going to take you anywhere. 100,000 breathing exercises, millions of asanas are not going to get you enlightened, Shankara says. But one breathing exercise and one asana will, if you do them with consciousness. So we have another 20 minutes at least. Remember, each week I tell you, have a few questions written down before satsang. I know some of you like just to come and listen to other people's questions and benefit a lot from that, and that's good. But there has to be a few instigators too. What do you say, Nick?
Last class with Anurag, we were talking a lot about karma yoga, and I was just wondering if it's the best thing to think about all of the koshas as just a tool to utilize to then eventually dissolve that into merging with Brahman at the end of this. Or I don't know if the end of it is the right thing to say even, but just thinking not of it as yourself, but just as a tool so that you can live your life as an instrument rather than thinking that you're doing anything, because instruments don't do anything. They're used. So is it good to think of all of that as just a tool that mother is using, and just let her be the guiding force and you be her instrument?
Yes, Nick, you're just a tool. You're just a tool. We're all just tools in her hands. So that's how the great souls conduct themselves, usually under the auspice of Shakti power. Some of them who aren't particularly focused on Shaktism or Divine Mother as their particular path, or they're more focused on the formless, or even maybe lesser gods. There are plenty of people who are, as Krishna says in the Gita, following lesser gods. But as long as that connection is made back to the ultimate, then the soul can go on being of service inside of the worlds, the lokas. And loka sangraha will come to them. That is, pretty soon they'll know what is the highest and best good for all worlds and all beings. It'll sort of become natural to them. So in the meantime, that's a humble position to take on, a servant. And that's why in Vaishnavism, for instance, they're having you practice the 5 moods, or at least become aware of the 5 moods, and then take one of them up for practice. I think there are beings who are able to take 3 or 4, or maybe all of them up in one lifetime. But for the most part, just beginning aspirants are supposed to take one mood, and one of those is called dasya. It means dasya bhava means to be a servant of the Lord. So you actually just think of yourself from now on when you choose that bhava, that mood, and you say, I'm going to conduct myself in this way now for the rest of my life. Then you just label yourself or categorize yourself or put yourself on that path of being a servant of God, like Hanuman was to Sri Ram. He's probably the best example of the Dasya Bhava. And then there are other moods you can pick. I sometimes share with you at Lex, when he first met me, said, "Oh, I see you're Shanta Bhava. You have the mood of peacefulness. You prefer peace to everything." And I didn't even know that that's what I preferred at the time, but I looked at myself and I came to realize, yes, I really like things peaceful. From peace, you can get everything else, as Holy Mother said. So, but anyway, I'm bringing up the 5 moods so that you have authority and validation from the Dharma and from the tradition for practicing being a servant of the Lord. You can also be a son of God or a daughter of God. And there are several moods. So these are to be chosen and practiced daily. It actually becomes a part of their sadhana, when a part of your sadhana when you do this.
I was.
You'd just excuse me a minute. You would have to take on that mood of servant, and probably do some meditation on what a servant is. And take any servant in the world, look at their job, like a servant of a rich man, Sri Ramakrishna used to talk about, who serves him hand and foot, every little thing, You know, he's actually given his whole life away to the master, like a devotee would to the great gurus. So in that way, you'd have to kind of make a study of what a servant is, how he conducts things. And he won't do anything without the permission of the master. Wouldn't think of doing anything out of line. So in that way, the devotee is thinking about every act that he or she does is for the Lord. So has to ask the Lord inside, should I do this? You know, would you like this? So you can see how it goes completely against the individual ego's way of conducting matters. People are getting into all sorts of trouble with their individual egos because that's the only permission, that's the only authority they have to ask permission of, is their own ego. Shall I do this? Oh yeah, go ahead, you know. Or should I go ahead and meditate in the morning? No, don't do that. You see. So the ego is going to take the opposite position to anything you want to do that's good for you, but it's going to tell you everything, give you all the permission you would ever want to hear for those things that aren't good for you or are questionable. What else do you have to say, Abhinaya?
I was just thinking that maybe.
You said straight.
Oh yeah. Excuse me. I was just
He's
thinking that.
He's my nephew, so I can. Yeah, I say he's my niece. He's my nephew, so I can tell him things like this. You see.
I was just thinking that this bhava that you take up, it's maybe connected to mantra practice also, because it's like a perspective that mantra practice should also be like a perspective to take up the repetition or the mystic sound or subtle vibration that one adopts as a mode or a function of life, perhaps.
You're talking about the servant
Yes.
mode again?
Yes, the servant mood.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yes, you're asking the ishtam inside of you for permission to do every little thing. So even the speaking of the mantra has to be done in that kind of awareness, along that kind of path, so that you keep yourself, your vow, your vrata firm, and you keep yourself on the path with that. And you know, it even works in terms of forms. Like you create a form inside your head, in your mind's eye, about what God looks like, God or goddess looks like, and then you focus on that form. So that's also, along with mantra, a way of creating an inner life for yourself, a spiritual life that is more grounded in what is natural and spontaneous, and so in the realms of name and form, also that name means, to the devotee, name means mantra, and form means the ishtam. So the name and form of Maya get changed to Mahamaya. And time gets changed to Lord Shiva, Trikaladarshi. So you take Maya and turn it all into Mahamaya, and eventually it'll all be Brahman if you do that. So Mother acts as the intermediary between the gross and the transcendent. And that's why we have to exercise our minds, because that's our subtle level of life and existence. Our mind is our second body, and our third body is formless, and our fourth body is transcendent. So there's a God blog I put on that you can read on the new website. It's called "I Am Not the Body, but I Have Three of Them." But the important thing is that those bodies are mine. You know, I'm not the body. The body doesn't own me, but those bodies are all mine. Yes, Annapurna.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask you if you would repeat what you just said a moment ago. You said name equals mantra and form equals ishtam. And then did you say tongue? Tongue is Shiva?
Time,
Time, thank
time.
you. There we go, that makes sense. Thank you.
It's just how to transform Maya into Mahamaya and then into Brahman. So that Maya goes away when everything is seen as Brahman. Yeah, so look on the new website for a God blog about that. You think you just gave me my idea for my next God blog. Saraswati, get your pens and pencils out. She's been making me nice images for my God blogs. And three of those people you'll see on the screen there's Erica. Namaste, Erica. And then there's Nick and Saraswati. They're all moving here. They already have a house here down in Honaka, just at the foot of the hill here where I live. So they're moving here in about 2 or 3 weeks, is it? So we hope all the quarantine things and all that just work out real smoothly, and they're not changing things up on us every other day, so that you can just get tested and come here. But there is I wouldn't call it a mass exodus, but a small exodus from some of these mainland cities to these beautiful jewel islands. In the scriptures, they call Mother's Land Mani Dvipa, the jewel islands of essence. So we feel in Hawaii here, we're really close to her, that these islands sort of represent the beauty and peace and inwardness of Divine Mother's realms. And even if you don't live here, you're welcome to come. We have our next real meeting face to face will be possible here with our Holy Mother retreat in November. Is it, Annapurna, or December?
December, I think it's from the 11th to the 15th, a Friday to Tuesday.
Yeah, so come to that, everyone, and we'll meet together in this big, large room I'm sitting in here. We'll have a beautiful retreat on the teachings of the Holy Mother. All right, so another 5-10 minutes maybe. Any other questions coming forth from the collective mind of humanity?
Hi, Babaji. So I was thinking about your class last Sunday, and you had mentioned the contrast between the sun god and Kali, and I was thinking about this morning. But I was hoping that you could talk on or speak on how light and dark can be teachers, and just speak a little bit more on the contrast between the sun god and Kali.
Yeah, that's actually another nice God blog, but maybe even a book that came into my mind when I was speaking on the Akshi Upanisad last week, who is the traveler of the skies and the father of a billion sons, and the one who grants us our flood of days, and who makes darkness, who enhances darkness and contrast and so forth. I was thinking if you were to somehow put Surya Narayan, the sun god, right next to Mother Kali, the goddess of blackness and darkness, it would be a very interesting thing. And then it sort of occurs to one that night and day are like that. It's like sun god comes and then he trails away, and darkness sets in, and Mother Kali comes creeping on, sort of like fog on little cat's feet, as the poem says. And she takes over everything. And then there's this beautiful black night full of stars, and the Mahamaya blows between midnight and 4. And then, like this morning, we were up here, right here in this room, and the sun comes up behind us as we're facing this altar, you see, when we meditate. So the 5 of us were sitting here, and this is, so basically the sun comes, we get up before sunrise and it's dark. And then you're meditating. If you ever open your eyes to look at the master or mother image, then you see that just a little bit of light has come. And finally, right at the end of the hour's meditation, which is about, 6:30, 5:30 to 6:30, we're meditating here. Right at 6:30, a sunbeam comes and strikes the master's picture right there behind me. Every morning it does that, unless it's a cloudy morning, which is rare. And all of a sudden, it's just the whole altar lights up naturally by the ray of the sun, Surya Narayan. And then we know another day in our flood of days is about to begin, and then we stir and recite the Gayatri, and then move into our day of worship. And this morning it was especially nice because it's the first of 9 days of Navaratri. So that night and day, or light and darkness laying on top of each other is a very interesting concept. It's sort of a stark duality in the realm of Maya, that so contrasting that they can't really exist together, but they can exist side by side. So it's also sort of like waking and deep sleep, or any other comparison you'd want to make that has these real stark cosmic dualities existing side by side. And probably gives you then both permission, if you need it, and also the inspiration to rise beyond all dualities and into the light of Brahman, which is probably a light that's different than the light of the sun. Light of consciousness is of a different nature than sunlight. And so in the Upanishads, the seer is about, the rishi is about to pass from the body, and he asks God to remove the sun because it's veiling the true light of consciousness in him. The sun is in the way. So he says, please take away the sun. So this being's about ready to leave the body and transcend all dualities and all worlds and names and forms and even the Trinity that operates them, and just meld into the light of pure conscious awareness, timeless, deathless awareness. So just as probably the light of the sun is of a different nature than the light of Brahman, I would say the nature of darkness at night is of a different nature than the darkness of Kali. The darkness of Kali is radiantly blue-black and living and incredibly warming and endearing. It's a blackness that's very endearing. There are songs about it, of course, beings who have dissolved themselves into it, like Shiva. When Shiva dissolves himself into Kali, then, well, you can see the image there on Kanya Kali. Are you there? She's showing us her image of Kali standing on top of Shiva, and to try and depict somehow how Shiva falls into this great swoon when Kali comes up out of his heart. That's the way I heard it interpreted. There's some interpretations that my teacher didn't like is, oh, how dare you stand on the chest of your husband, oh mother? What innocent and pure wife would do such a thing? And my teacher would say, I don't like that interpretation. Which one do you like? He says, well, that he's the flower and she's the fragrance. I like that one. She's come out of his heart, out of his chest. And he's the flower, the great big red hibiscus, and she's the fragrance, or coming out of the plumeria, or other beautiful scents we have here on the islands. So all of those are higher symbologies, if you will, or truisms about the nature of light and darkness, and how here in the world they're beautiful, no doubt, but they can't compare to what is beyond duality or non-duality. So as we reach the end of our time, any short questions someone might have? We don't have to be exactly on time today.
Namaste,
Yes, Imre.
Babaji.
Namaste. I haven't seen you for some time. Good to see you.
Yes, I have, let's say I have tried to write you, but I had too many things and I decided not to do it. But right now I know my question. And it is, as you mentioned, this deep blue color darkness, and it seems that traditions know about it. So my question simply, which also links to your last words, is that, and probably it's a wonderful homework, that somehow it seems that Shaivism and the Kabbalistic tree of life interrelate, or there is an analogy, and all these these two traditions at least seem to be very close, even with these forms, and yes, there is also the Dzogchen Buddhism. So maybe if we could go into it somehow, it would be really beautiful. And yes, that's all.
Yes, you're talking about that special color that I mentioned, that bluish blackish color. In the traditions, it's called shyama. So it's interesting that both Kali and Krishna are both called shyama, and because they both have that color, sometimes they describe that color as ash. Sort of isn't really white, isn't really gray. It can come out with a kind of blue tint to it or sheen to it, depending on what you've burned, of course. But the reference to ash is, of course, the reference to renunciation. I was working on a God blog yesterday, and where I was posing those ideas that India has that beautiful saying, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti, which means there is one goal, many paths leading to it. Or sometimes they say there's one truth and many ways of finding it, or there's one ocean, many rivers leading to it. They have that kind of interpretation or definition for that universal sloka, which is, I found in the Rig Veda. I wanted to find the source for that. It's like It starts out with a prayer to Indra and the gods. Om Indram Mitram Varunamagni Yatarato Divyaha Sapurna Garutaman. That's Garuda, carrier of prana. And then it goes on, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vedanta Yagnyam Yaman Matarishvana Mahu. So it mentions the great mind, the Mahat, and various other gods who all find their way to that one Ekam Sat, one truth. So on that God blog, I was putting together the fact that there's many paths leading to one goal, or many paths leading to one mountaintop. But it's very interesting that paths don't lead to a mountaintop. You see, they lead to the foot of the mountain. No path goes up the mountain. So I was thinking, so really you can say one goal, many paths, but only one way. And so that occurred to me. So I was writing about that yesterday, that all the paths are like the different religions that lead to this one eternal principle. Call it what you will, Brahman or Allah, or in the traditions you're mentioning, Parama Shiva, or Buddha called it Pragyaparam, supreme intelligence. All the paths lead there, but when you get to the foot of the mountain, there's only one way up it. And the rishis have gone up it before, and they've left. It's like my brother and I, back in the early days, were climbing mountains with pitons and ropes and carabiners and the whole thing. And so when you climb El Capitan in Yosemite, there's only one way up that, and everyone uses it. And the people who went first pounded pitons into the stone wall, you see, into the granite, like 2 feet by 2 feet. They worked their way up, pounding these things, putting their carabiner in there with their ropes around them, and they just went up what's called the nose of Yosemite, because Yosemite sort of comes out to that one face that everyone climbs. And so if you go up the nose of Yosemite, there's carabiners up there, and thank God too, because there's no way, there's no fingernail holds or anything like some of these radical climbers use. So that's the one way up the mountain to the top. So the paths all lead to the one way. So that's a different definition than anyone's ever given that, because it's usually just all religions lead to the same goal. Okay, great. That's a great teaching, and we should try and realize it and follow it so that we're all tolerant, at least, or if not accepting of other religions. But when it really comes down to it, for the spiritual practitioner, when he reaches the foot of the mountain through his particular tradition, he's got to go up that face. And there's only one way of doing that, and the rishis have shown him how to do it. That is, the great souls of all religions have shown him how to get into formless samadhi. And that one way is called renunciation. You leave everything behind when you start up the face of that cliff, and the only thing that's left to you is the top, the summit. When you get to the summit, Lord Buddha says, then everything below, all you can have is just compassion for everything below, because of there's so many dualities and problems and movements and wars and every other thing going on down below there. But you've got the peace of the mountaintop there, and it's taking you up and above every other consideration. You've reached the goal of human existence. And so that one way is renunciation. And so at the end of that God blog, I looked up Bhartrihari. Bhartrihari started out as a merchant, and he wrote a big scripture on how to live life as a merchant. Then he became a king, and he wrote a whole treatise about how to be a king. Then the third part of his life, he became a monk, and he wrote a whole treatise about how to give it all up. So Bhartrihari is a very interesting soul. I'd like to, and he's got this, the last writings were called Only Renunciation is Fearless. That's the end of the name of these verses. Only renunciation is fearless. Nothing else surpasses renunciation. And that's Sri Ramakrishna to a T. And that crown around Christ's head, that was renunciation of all suffering. So everyone is showing us, all the great souls are showing us one thing. You're going to leave it all behind, either by force or by will. So you yourself will see the efficacy of leaving everything behind. And then it's just a matter of how you do that, how you work your way to that. There are different paths and different goals and sub-goals and everything. So that is that one way that leads you to the supreme goal of life, is that you'll finally see that only God exists and the world is unreal. That's how Vedanta puts it in the end. That Brahman Satya Jagad Mithya. Brahman is the only reality and the world is not real. It's dreamlike. It's nivritti, to be renounced. That's what is actually, the Tantras call it, nivritti, to be renounced. The one word they apply to it. So how does that apply to your question, Imre? I'm not exactly sure myself, but I think it has something to do with that color black, blue-black, that ashes are for renunciation and giving everything up. And that's why you smear them on your forehead or you cover your body with them. Or you offer everything into the fire in puja, even if you're a householder. You just do your pujas. You don't know what you're doing? You think you're worshiping some smaller gods? No, you're appeasing smaller gods so they'll let you renounce the world so you can get into your Atman again, back to your source, to your essence. Where else would you want to go? Actually, you've never been anywhere else but that Atman. You just thought you were somewhere else. So that's what the color shyama reminds me of. And much more, but I won't keep you here too much later to explain it all. But do look on the sites at these God blogs, which I'm sort of putting my distilled thoughts of 30 years of practice, or 30 years of SRV life and 50 years of practice into these God blogs. And they're just little Brahman bites, you see. So you can take these great concepts like the universe is just mind and read 3 paragraphs about it, sort of all condensed down. So here I will then leave you, as it were, not really, because I'm there in your hearts and you're here in mine. And remember, you're at the first day of 9 days of worship. Let's all together worship her, deep faith, and may her meditations upon us be pure, and may ours upon her be successful in reaching her and dissolving ourselves into her feet of bliss, as they call it. So happy Navaratri. I'll see you maybe on the 8th day then, if I don't see you before then, on next Saturday's Satsang, or tomorrow night's streaming class on the sun god, Akshi Upanisad. Namaste, everyone. Aloha.
Happy Navaratri.